All right, welcome back. I'm getting my organizations mixed up. It's Oxfam South Africa we're focusing on now. Red Cross will do in the next hour here on the program, so my apologies. Let me tell you about Oxfam, though. It's jointly with women in informal employment, globalizing and organizing. They're hosting a high-level consultation with grassroots women's organizations and movements in South Africa and Southern African region. The consultations are being held in Johannesburg as part of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel for women's economic empowerment process. So to tell us more about the Southern Africa Consultation on women's economic empowerment, we're joined in studio by Sipho Mthathi. She is the Executive Director of Oxfam South Africa. So nice to have you. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Tell us a little bit more about what prompted these consultations with women organizations and movements.
So, as you mentioned, we organized this consultative forum, actually in partnership also with the UN High-Level Panel on Women's Economic Empowerment, as a way to say that the mandate that the UN Secretary General gave in Davos earlier this year, that there needed to be a plan to address this chronic issue of women being marginalized in the global economy had to be addressed. We also felt then that the solutions to a problem that faces particularly grassroots women cannot be devised without their voices at the table. And so this consultation was meant to put those voices right front and center in a conversation and an initiative that is essentially about their lives.
Yeah. I mean, what are the objectives of the Southern African consultation on women's economic empowerment? What are you hoping to achieve out of all of it?
Yeah, so partly what we are hoping to achieve is that the recommendations from the women themselves will then be submitted formally to the UN process, where a report is being drafted for adoption by the United Nations General Assembly, so that then a global initiative can be taken on board by the UN body that includes all nation states.
Yeah.
And so that's the one objective. We want women's voices in that report. The other purpose for the meeting was really to get women who are doing things and who are at the coalface of many of these barriers to women's economic empowerment and participation, to say these are the things we are doing. This is how we see that the barriers that we face daily, including women, and we had women in the room who are entrepreneurs. You had a woman earlier who's an entrepreneur,
yeah,
who are saying, look, women are out there doing things. The way in which the economy is structured is pitted against women's ability to participate fully, and also to look at some of the key areas, including, as you mentioned in your screen, the issue of women in informal work.
Yes.
Because we know, particularly in our continent, that the majority of women are sitting in this sector, and yet the way that governments think about economies is there's the formal economic sector and then there's the informal sector. And there's never an acknowledgement of the extent to which the informal sector, which many women occupy, is central to the survival of many of our economies.
It's huge. It is huge. I mean, if you look at the amount of women that are in the informal sector as opposed to the formal sector, I mean, the graph must look like this. I mean, how do we know?
Yeah. We know that in Sub-Saharan Africa, 83% of women are in the informal economy. It's as high as that.
It's amazing.
And you can see in many parts of our continent where, in fact, there is no such thing as the formal and the informal community. The informal community is the economy, is the formal economy, and is holding nations together in ways that we feel strongly. And the women from the 6 regional countries in the region have said that we want our contributions to be counted, we want it to be valued, we want it to be quantified, and we want fair pay for our labor.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the issue of gender equality, because that's set out, and the date 14 years from now, 2030, achieving the Sustainable Development for Gender Equality. I mean, obviously, I mean, to say we're not on the right path is the wrong way of doing it, but are we doing things right? I mean, is this achievable at this rate?
Well, we have to believe that we can achieve it, and we have to work as hard as we believe. However, we also have to acknowledge that we're dealing with very deep and fundamental problems.
Yeah.
I mean, at the meeting, women pointed out the extent to which the rules of the global economy are pitted against the majority of people and indeed, women. And so we've got to look at the rules that govern how the economy are run, which to date we know is producing the situation that Oxfam described, where 1% own the world's biggest share of wealth. So we've got to sort that out, because you can't address women's economic empowerment outside of addressing the macroeconomy, making it work for the majority of people, making it work for women. And so we've got to do that. We can't just come with half-baked solutions. Let's get women into the entrepreneurship, when in fact the way that markets are structured are explicitly to exclude women, and particularly small-scale producers, as we see in many places. So we have a lot of work to do. As the Executive Director of UN Women said at our meeting yesterday, we have to bite the elephant, we have to bite it in big chunks, but we've got to know exactly which are the right chunks to bite.
I have to, we're running out of time, but I mean, I think a very big step was when the UN Secretary General's high-level panel for women's economic empowerment process was actually formed in March this year. Has it had any impact?
Well, it's doing a lot of work, and we must commend our Sipho Mthathi, who is heading the initiative. She has been at our insistence as civil society, she has been to every corner of the world to say to government, you've got to step up to the plate. She has worked with civil society across the world to convene these voices that need to inform what is put at the table of our governments, in this September and next year in March, and is really making the effort to mobilize as many stakeholders as possible, including the private sector. And so a lot of work is happening. We must understand that this is only the beginning of this initiative.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time, but we must also get it right, because we also can't do what we did with the MDGs, where we keep chasing the numbers and we forget to address the structural underpinnings of the problems, which are deep. Yeah. An example, women in Zimbabwe said to us, you're coming here to talk to us about women's economic empowerment. Our economy is completely dysfunctional. Our country is at its knees. So you have to factor in, the political context. And you also have to not just think about increasing women's economic opportunities, but also addressing the context of patriarchy, which means that many women's potential is not able to fully be acknowledged and explored.
Listen, this is an issue that needs to be explored a lot deeper. Sipho Mthathi, the Executive Director of Oxfam SA, thank you for doing the work you're doing, for the passion that you're doing it with as well. And of course, our former Vice President here, our Deputy President, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who's heading up that UN panel. So thank you very much to these powerful women and the work that they're doing, but we need to reach those grassroots. We're so late, but we're going to take a very quick break, and then the news will come to you just after 8.